Welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. My name is Amri Johnson, your host. I hope you're well. Join me as we continue to deconstruct the shortcomings of traditional DEI strategies and co-create a vision for more transformative, human-centered approaches to inclusion. Myself and my esteemed guests will challenge the status quo, dive deep into the reactive, supplemental nature of many DEI initiatives. We'll explore how to reclaim the profound and transformational potential of inclusion as a catalyst for collective growth, empowerment, and organizational change. Season 2 of the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast starts now. Welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. This is Amri Johnson, your host. I hope you're well. In this episode, I'm going to talk about a few things, a little bit about what's going on right now in the so-called DEI space. You all might not realize why I use the word so-called, and I'm just going to let you know right now. I use it because a lot of people have this framing for DEI that's grossly incomplete. So when I say so-called, I do it because it's a familiar phrase, even though I focus on inclusion. Now, DEI is a lot of things to a lot of people, both those who are for it and those who are against it have differing ways of looking at it. Now, whatever way you have, I focus on inclusion, and whatever way you have, if I say so-called, hopefully it makes sense to you, whatever framing you have. My hope is that by reading my blogs, my Reconstructing Inclusion Substack, listening to this podcast, listening to and reading some of the things that I post on LinkedIn, reading my book, Reconstructing Inclusion, that you can have a more expanded, a deeper understanding of what this work actually is and can be. I'm going to start today by talking about why did I write my book, Reconstructing Inclusion, making now so-called DEI accessible, actionable, and sustainable. Well, here's the thing. I wrote Reconstructing Inclusion for a broad audience, for people that worked in organizations that really had influence on the organizational culture. My focus for the conversation was not just on DEI practitioners. It was for everyone else that might not have the vocabulary, the jargon, etc., in the space, but I wanted them to understand how everybody is a part of this conversation. So my focus was on making the conversation about DEI being accessible, actionable, and aligned. What I mean by that is when it's accessible, it means to everyone. Everyone is a part of the paradigm of inclusion as I see it and as I believe it can be and has to be for its transformational potential to be realized. Secondly, it's actionable. That means it's unambiguously prioritized. And you know when something's unambiguously prioritized in your organization, what resources go into it, what attention goes into it, what outcomes are produced that are measured and talked about around how the culture gets better, shifts, how people develop skills and capabilities to make this notion of inclusion something that produces outcomes that the organization would like to see in the organizational culture and its people and how things get done around here. And that it's aligned. And when I say aligned, I use that word because if it's not aligned with the organizational purpose, the organizational mission, it won't be sustained. It has to be accessible, actionable, and aligned. And that's what Reconstructing Inclusion was all about. And that's what my work is all about. 2, Reconstructing Inclusion did not focus on symptoms. I focused on systems. That means people that are focused on DEI as core to their role, they cannot change a system or shift those systems on their own. They can't engage with the patterns of a complex adaptive system, which organizations are, without really broad engagement. And it doesn't mean everybody, but it means as many people as you could possibly have, but particularly reaching a group of influential people that want to carry this work forward and influence the organizational culture in a positive way. It's a commitment of these people that you reach that want to shift how things are done around here. The third reason that I wrote Reconstructing Inclusion and who I wrote it for was that inclusion is a set of skills and capabilities that create the conditions for everyone to thrive and for the organization to become generative and anti-fragile. Generative means it's producing more than just financial value. I believe in financial value, don't get me wrong. But if it's just financial value alone that an organization is committed to, the organization is thinking short term. And my experience with short term organizations is that their value is short term as well. When I talk about anti fragile, it's from the work of Nassim Taleb. And it's really about bouncing back from stressors and not just bouncing back to the baseline, but bouncing back stronger. That you don't break. You might bend, but when you bend, you come back with the kind of force that propels you to the next level. DEI is a we thing. I joke oftentimes, I'm a big hip hop fan, that Snoop said it's a G thing. Inclusion ain't nothing but a we thing. It's not a them or an us thing. It's an everyone thing. It requires everyone that is a part of that organization to be learning the skills and capabilities to make inclusion normative with interdependence in mind, meaning my destiny and your destiny are connected. So we have to make this happen in a way that our culture gives us what we need to make our best contributions to the mission and do that over and over again. So why is Reconstructing Inclusion perhaps more relevant now than it was when it was published at the end of 2022? Well, the letters DEI got hijacked in the past few years by newer practitioners pro DEI, as well as opponents anti DEI. They both, in a way, hijacked it. And in both cases, the hijacking has been incomplete, like hijacking often is. Interestingly, after a few years of bounty that a lot of people that were practicing so-called anti-racism, I use so-called a lot, don't I? You get why I do now. So-called anti-racism practitioners, they were benefiting. They had bounty. And now they're not benefiting from the capture of DEI. In fact, the anti-DEI practitioners are benefiting from DEI in some cases more than pro-DEI practitioners are. Isn't that interesting? Here's what I mean by that. I wrote a post on LinkedIn recently, and it goes a little something like this. If one is known as quote unquote anti-DEI and anti-DEI activist, what happens if DEI goes away? The reality is that anyone opposing the three letters believes in an ideology that ironically depends on what they claim to oppose. In this case, their particular branding of DEI, the anti-DEI, the illegal DEI that President Trump's executive orders talk about. So how can you tell if someone doesn't want DEI to go away? Well, they never make it clear what they believe in. It's definitely not any kind of principles. And if it isn't principle centered, it is ideologically informed and centered on a desire to get something for self. It has nothing to do with anything greater than personal gain, and therefore it's relatively shallow and inspired by a desire for power. If, and this is where I believe we missed the mark, if it's challenged with rigor, the adherent will start with ad hominem pushback. They'll start going after someone's character. They'll do this because they know that without that which they are opposed to, they have nothing. They are devoid of a significant foundation. Notice, none of them have been in dialogue with someone who has a principle-centered approach. I'd welcome such a conversation, but I doubt it would ever happen. Principles will always shine a blinding light on ideology, and one with an ideological fixation will do all they can to smother, discredit, or dismiss any elevation of principles, and they'll do so with the power of their reach and the ideological audience they've captured. I say that about anti DEI as I have in some cases. I've actually talked about some people who have done something similar with anti racism. In both cases, a lack of clear principles is almost always about increasing one's ideological capture, whether they have noble or sincere intentions or bad faith. For those who've made their name on anti DEI, if DEI goes away, their entire brand platform that made them famous fades away with it. Now, what are the questions you ask of someone who's so called anti DEI? Those I've asked haven't built their brand on being against it. They've had principled reasons why they weren't. Some of the people that responded to the post that I'm reading right now, they told me why. A lot of it was about the word equity and what equity came to mean as equality of outcomes, as discrimination based on a group identity. Some people went about that kind of silly framing. It didn't work. Might have worked and seemed like it was working, but it wasn't sustainable because it wasn't built on any clear principles. So those that I've asked, they've been principled in their responses about what hasn't worked. The problem is, and this is important, and it's something that you might want to note if you're a practitioner listening to this podcast or somebody who might even be opposed to DEI listening. It's important because the principles that weren't there were not there in many cases, and we didn't really look at them as closely as we could with the lens of being more critical of ourselves than anybody possibly could have been. That is what I always do. I have a bulletproof approach to this work because if somebody comes at me, I can tell them very clearly the principles that my work rests upon. If they want to have a conversation or a real dialogue about it, we can have it. I'm not going to try to be right. I like being right, but it's never transformed anything. So I'm not going to do that. But I will share those principles. And I think part of the problem is people who are pro DI did not have a principle center conversation. We didn't ask the right questions of those who are so-called anti-DEI, even though their whole livelihood, their whole reputation depends on it. So completing this post, if we are serious about evolving DEI or whatever you call it, of course, I focus on inclusion. We all should be having dialogues about the principles, paradigms, and pathways needed to do so. The dialogues are critical. I'll continue with something that I talked about not too long ago. If you're familiar with the story of Chicken Little and his fellow dinner companions, they were dinner companions of Foxy Loxy. If you've ever seen this or watched the story or heard the story, they didn't have much dialogue. Foxy Loxy played his tricks, and the chickens panicked. Chicken Little, their leader, and told him the sky was falling. And then they followed Chicken Little into a cave, and they never ate another kernel of corn. Now, I've talked about the Disney classic Chicken Little in the past as a metaphor that too many DEI practitioners move toward the sky is falling mentality. It was a sky is falling mentality like Chicken Little over the past few years as people came out to attack critical race theory, DEI, president of Harvard. We can go down the line. People just pushed back and they were all just throwing these things out. That's the mindset that led many practitioners voluntarily into a cave. Rather than a thoughtful examination of ourselves and our work and its incisive questioning of the opposition, we shot back with cries of, they are wrong, they are racist, sexist, transphobic, confused, etc. All of it was a lack of a principled response. In part, these things led us to where we are today. Of course, no one, and be clear, I'm saying this, no one could have anticipated the overwhelming speed of the Trump administration and their followers. We could have known it was coming, and I did and began to start preparing for it, but the speed was overwhelming, and it's difficult right now. So don't get me wrong. I love y'all, if you're practitioners listening to this. But we could anticipate that heavy resistance was in motion, and we could have begun to skate to where the puck was going. Now we must, and we can. As this story about Chicken Little, as this metaphor I'm using as it relates to DEI or inclusion, as I style it, there are many birds that didn't go into the cave in the story. A lot of people didn't respond to the hype. I don't want to say a lot, good number that I know didn't do that, despite the hysteria. Some people did, but there were people that didn't. Now, there are others who I would consider a little Chicken Little-ish. Ibram X. Kendi and other popular influencers, for example, they were kind of like Chicken Littles. Maybe you can add Robin DiAngelo and many others who have become known as synonymous with the negative connotations of DEI. Right now, you don't see them writing or guesting on podcasts much at all. Maybe I'm just not looking for them, but I'm not finding them either. They're not there. I don't see people reposting what they're talking about. And if they are, I bet you, and if anybody knows of them and they want to share it with me, please do. Some of them are probably still in Chicken Little mode. Now, several anti-racist activists in the US and UK have stopped writing and contributing to the conversation completely. And they're doing so in a time when leadership is needed more than ever. Why is this the case? Well, in my opinion, from the outset, they lacked ample skin in the game. They got in, but it was when there was good fortune. And now that the fortune has slowed or isn't flowing as much as it was, they've run out. They've moved on to see where the gains that they gathered during the time of bounty can be otherwise deployed for future fortunes. If they are to return, and I'm telling you all this right now, whether you are anti-pro DEI, a practitioner, or somebody in an organization that believes inclusion can be a superpower, remember the plight of Chicken Little and that some of these people were Chicken Littles. And if they come back, remind them, hey, you want to do this, you want to engage in this conversation, you want to take your cachet from the past and then insert it into today as things are a little bit smoother again. Check yourself and do this work with a level of integrity, with level of principle, clear paradigms of things that can be sustained and pathways that people can put into action for the benefit of their organizations and their people thriving. Metaphorically, when the kitchen gets hot, now I don't eat chicken, I'm a vegetarian, but the metaphor seems to work, so I'm going to continue with it. When the kitchen gets hot, the chefs stay. Those who are hobbyist cooks are more likely to move to a place they can be more comfortable and hope the heat dissipates or that the chefs prepare enough for everyone. Chefs have skin in the game. I personally thrive in heat, so I'll continue to come up with new dishes, and I'm confident there's still enough for all to eat. But there is no room, none, for people to eat without contributing to at least helping prepare or serve the meals with one another. If someone is cooking and others are eating, the meal needs to be contributed to in some way. I would even say that you're adding value by being a great meal companion. But if you are in the kitchen when it's hot or serving the meal once prepared, not contributing meaningfully to the camaraderie and the ambiance of the conversation, don't return when the heat dies down, riding on the empty calories that you served up in the past. They've expired and they've contributed little nutritional value for longevity. Let me stick with this metaphor. The past few years, there were many kitchens. The conditions were comfortable. The shelves were well stocked. Popular recipes were in demand. In the DEI space, those recipes were based on grievance, race, racialization, gender, and particularly trans activism. what all of them had in common was they were steeped in deficit-oriented whataboutism. Now, this isn't what DEI is to me, but it is how DEI was branded and how it's been rebranded by those, ironically, who are anti DEI. Then, the past few years, they were quite interested in DEI, even though they say that they're against it. And what's that mean? What that means is DEI activists don't exist, as I said earlier, without DEI. Now, back to Chicken Little and Cocky Locky and all the characters of the Disney short Chicken Little. The Chicken Littles of the DEI space weren't all followed. Not everybody followed them in, and not everyone followed in the story, and not everyone believed that the sky was really falling. You didn't see those characters that didn't follow Chicken Little, the survivors, Cocky Locky, and perhaps Cocky Locky's crew. They didn't all follow Chicken Little into the cave. But in the story, you only saw the people who went into the cave and ended up getting eaten. I can't say how many followers Cocky Locky had, but in this sense that I'm talking about around DEI, I can say that there are many people that are still working hard to make inclusion an organizational superpower, like I am with my emergent inclusion framework. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So what I mean by that is that there are people, external consultants and practitioners, people inside of organizations who remain committed to doing a deeper version of inclusion work, and others doing culture work that's informed or adjacent to inclusion. They're there. There are people like Peter Musafariadis and his team at Diversity Atlas. There's Frederick Falker as he talks about difference to distance. There are Tony and Jen Silbert, who are experts in AI, appreciative inquiry, the AI before the one that we know now, who are working on dynamics around how we reframe conversations generatively. They've been doing this for a long time, and we've done that together. Also, Dr. Elizabeth Holmes, who was a pioneer in diversity management, along with April Thomas, who carries the legacy of her father, another pioneer in the diversity management space. Dr. Roosevelt Thomas' work, April continues to bring it forward. There's also Dr. Starling Hunter. He's a forerunner and expert in organizational network analysis, as well as Raquel Ark, who delves into organizations and leadership via the art and science of listening. Most of these folks have been on this podcast, or they will be. They're featured as part of the faculty for the Generative Inclusion College, and they have influenced the evolution of the emergent inclusion framework. If you'd like to learn more about how to make inclusion your superpower in your organization, visit my LinkedIn or click on the registration tab in the overview of the podcast to sign up for our next live virtual event, Elevating Your Inclusion Edge. In conclusion, be like Cocky Locky. Speak to what is, not just what we feel. DEI is under a microscope. We needed it. In fact, as practitioners, we've needed to look deeper into its pitfalls and possibilities for quite a long time. It's something that I've spent a long time doing. By us not doing so collectively, we've made the field, the industry, and the space vulnerable, maybe even a bit fragile. Moving forward, we need to re-anchor our work on paradigms, principles, and pathways that allow us to use this time in the valley to arise toward making inclusion the superpower it can be. I hope this was helpful. Please let me know in the comments or wherever else you can reach me. Also, sign up for Elevating Your Inclusion Edge. Make it a great day. Peace. If you are committed or simply a little bit curious about how to make DEI accessible to everyone, actionable, that is, unambiguously prioritized and sustainable, aligned with personal and organizational purpose, hit the subscribe button. Make it a great day. Peace.